Mhm. Welcome to the History of LA Ska one-on-one sessions. I'm Junor Francis, your host, alongside our producer and my good friend Eric Kohler. Now, for your information, this series celebrates and aims to preserve and promote the ska rocksteady and vintage reggae scene in Southern California and beyond through insightful conversations with legends and modern-day talent, including those behind the scenes. Hence, whether you listen to this podcast series or watch us on YouTube, a big thank you for your support. And please, in the most begging way, remember to subscribe and tell a friend. As a matter of fact, tell as many friends as you possibly can. This is what's interesting. Now, on this episode, rather, we welcome veteran British singer, musician, producer, label operator, DJ, promoter from the Trojans, Gaz Rockin Blues, Club Records, and much, much more. This just a few of the many, many hats that the incomparable and amazing Gaz Mayall wears.
Speaking of hats,
My gosh.
Gaz, welcome and thank you for joining us today.
Well, thank you very much for having me. It's so good to see you guys again.
Yes,
It really is.
Yes.
And Junior and I were talking about this the other day. It was such a pleasure to meet you in person finally at the Stranger Cole show in Los Angeles in March. So,
almost a year.
yeah,
Almost a year
right.
ago.
Believe it or not.
To the
Yeah,
date,
almost a
yeah.
year. Which is
Time
wild.
flies, man. It's such
Yeah,
a
you're not
ball
kidding,
there
man.
with you guys and Stranger. That was such a wonderful occasion. And Ocean 11 for the first time they
Yes.
were formed and all that time. That was so good.
That
So
was
much talent in LA.
it was a magical
Yes.
night from start to
Their
finish.
four-part harmony is memorable.
Right,
Yeah.
indeed, and we know you get out here every once in a while. We want to start by asking you about your father, John Mayall, who's often referred to as the godfather of British blues. At what age did you realize that your father was famous
Well,
and beloved by so many?
well, we all came down from Manchester at the same time. My mother helped facilitate it. My dad was playing kind of on an amateur pub scene in Manchester and the local environs, villages and towns nearby. And I'll tell you the story how it happened if we've got enough time.
Yeah.
It shouldn't take too long this one, but it's quite a nice little story. Dick Hextall Smith, the saxophonist, he was playing with Alexis Corner's Blues Syndicate in London at the time, which was the very first rhythm and blues band, and it was run by Alexis Corner, who had he ran the first rhythm and blues club in London in Acton, started in 1962, and right from its inception, people would travel from as far as Newcastle, which is like coming from as far as San Francisco down to London, to LA or something, that kind of distance. The animals were formed out of that experience. Eric Gordon was coming down from Newcastle, and you had people coming from Wales and all over. And the Rolling Stones were formed in that very club.
History.
And Dick Hextall Smith, the saxophonist with Alexis at the time, was doing a show up in Manchester, and stayed the night over. I didn't have somewhere to stay, and my dad said, "Oh, you can stay at mine." And that following morning, there was this black gospel singer was coming over to jam with my dad in the morning. He had this kind of harmonium, which is your pedal. It's a keyboard, your pedal, and it's quite an old school kit, like an organ, And she was singing, and Dick heard this. He said, described like the most angelic noise. He said, "What is that?" And he came downstairs expecting to see a whole choir, and it was just this one lady singing with my dad playing an organ.
Man.
And he said, "Oh my God, this is incredible."
Mm.
He says, "You've got to come to London." He told Alexis about it when he got back to town. Alexis got in touch with him, so got him a gig in London at his club. And he says, "My God, you have to move to London because it's all kicking off. The Beatles are just arriving on the scene around that same year, and all the bands from different parts of the country. But London was the capital, and you had to be there to make it happen." My mum said to him, said, "I tell you what, her great aunt Louis had died, and she's just come into a few quid." And she says, "I don't expect to live in Manchester the rest of our lives, but I tell you what I do. We'll move to London for 1 year, and I'll back you up. I'll get a job teaching, whatever." She was teaching pottery at the time.
Okay.
She was a sculptress, and I said, "I'll give you 1 year, and if you make it in that year, we'll stay." and he made it in that year.
Oh my goodness.
He was working
So
non-stop,
what year would that have been now?
1963.
Mm.
And so from there, some of his musicians couldn't handle London. They moved back to Manchester. He got new guys within a year or so. He's got people like Eric Clapton playing in the band, and it just took off. He didn't really get famous as such on the mainstream ever, in a sense. But, you know, when we were kids, you know, like it was all about the Beatles, the Stones, and the charts. They were all friends of my family. So we used to see them, and like we were allowed to stay up to see what Paul McCartney's coming over.
Because they all loved and respected your father.
Yeah, and they were all part of the same scene, you know. And my dad was less sociable. He was just driven and locked into his career. But my mother, you know, she was more sociable, and so extended the kind of family, kind of friend scene. So she was really good. Really, her best friend was Marianne Faithfull. So they would.
Oh my goodness.
Jagger would be around every other day, and we had all kinds of people in the living room. Was a rehearsal room as well for the band. So
what an experience, though.
there was a lot going on. But you know, if I went to school, nobody had heard of my dad. You know,
Yeah.
the primary school, they'd heard it when Jimi Hendrix arrived in London. All of a sudden, he's 1966. All of a sudden, he's on the TV doing Hey Joe, and everyone's heard of him all of a sudden overnight. But still, no one's heard of my dad.
Yeah,
which was great. So that it was anonymity, and I felt that I was kind of part of an underground scene, and I was quite comfortable with that. Alexis Corner remained on the underground scene. My dad always stayed on the underground scene. They all did well, and I've always been content. Chris Blackwell from Island Records once said to me, "So what do you want to do with your career?" He said, "Like you want to be a DJ, you want to be a club runner, you want to be a producer, you want to be a band leader. What is it you want? You know, you should pick one really, and then specialize."
How old were you then? How old were you?
This is in the late 80s. So I was already got the club and the band and the record label going by then. And I said to Chris, I said, look, I want to do the whole lot of them, the whole spectrum.
Yeah,
I'm like a musical,
I pick.
yeah. I said, I'm like a musical farmer. I've got all these different fields around me, like a musical wheel, spokes going off every direction, but it keeps turning. And I like to be in the hub of it and have all these fields in operation. And every now and again, you leave one field fallow for a year. So, you know, that's not bringing in the money then. You let it go wild for a bit. But at the same time, you keep the whole thing as one big happy farm.
Mhm.
Yeah, that's a great analogy.
Musical farmer, that's me.
Right. So, what was your first exposure to Jamaican music? You can recall.
Quite an easy one to say that, because it would have been the 60s as a kid, when all of a sudden the kids down the street and certain friends of mine from school would be like, when like 10, 11 years old. And
was that Manchester or London?
Oh no, I moved to London in 1963. So we're talking about 4 years later now, in 1967,
Okay.
when 007 was in the charts. And then the following year, it really kicked in, 1968. Every youth club in my area where the kids would go and hang out, there'd be non-stop, like today you call it boss reggae or skinhead reggae, but we just called it reggae then. That was a new word for it.
Right.
We weren't even familiar with the word ska or blue beat, because we were just that slightly different age. We'd seen My Boy Lollipop on the TV a couple of years before and got excited about that, but that was just a novelty thing and it didn't really reach our world. But by 68, and I remember seeing this kid that I knew walking down the street towards me with a two-tone suit and shades and loafers, and he looked so shiny and slick, and I'm like, oh my god, you know, that's the future. And
Yes.
and there's my family dragging us around to festivals and everyone with long hair now and stuff, you know. I was like, no, I want to be slick like that.
Yeah.
And then so you go to the youth club and you just and Itmek and Israelites and every other record you can imagine for the next couple of years, whilst I was still down in southeast London before I moved to Notting Hill, where I remain to this day. And that the skinhead thing kind of took over. At first, it was a slick thing that everyone was excited about. I think it was a continuation from the mod scene, really. the mod scene splintered into two. It went one the hippie side, and
Okay.
then one the skinhead side.
Oh, interesting.
So you had like the kind of half of the kids went one direction, the other half went the other. And I was really
So do you mean, for instance, musically and stylistically and scene wise? So like so part of the mods that were into some of like the soul and the rock, so to speak, right, continued on to enjoy and to embrace like skinhead reggae, and then some went more into, like you said, like the hippie side of things.
yeah, well, I could, I mean, it's hard because I was a kid to really kind of work it out then, but I worked it out since.
Right.
You know, taken to a lot of shows, and my dad's shows and things in clubs. We were allowed to go to the clubs and things like Flamingo, Whiskey a Go Go, and the Marquee.
Okay.
And we'd be in the dressing room, and like we wouldn't be that old, and they'd let us in there because my dad was playing. And I noticed, you know, kind of the fashions were. If I look back at like what my dad was wearing at the time, at first it was kind of short hair. Sometimes they came out the beatnik scene and kind of like
Sure.
a bit of a beard and kind of slick. Then it was all mods coming to his shows because they were into the blues and rhythm and blues.
Right. Okay.
You know, it was a kind of it was connected to the soul scene, and everyone was all the clubs my dad was playing, and being he was playing R&B. All those clubs were the same clubs and same audience who were coming to see Little Stevie Wonder when he first came over, and Eddie Floyd and kind of Don Covey and Otis Redding, all the soul stars who were coming over to play. That it was the same audience pretty much. So if you look at old photos of my dad from like the early 60s, you'll see a real like hardcore kind of mod scene there.
Yeah.
And then my dad kind of, within a few years, a lot of the musicians ended up sort of going more in the direction of rock music,
Okay.
which I suppose a bit more like the white side that wasn't going pop, but was going kind of more creative and creating their own scene. But there again, the people who were into like the black scene and soul music,
right,
there were so many Jamaican kids growing up in London whose parents had moved there 10 years or 15 years before or 20 years before now, that were all coming up and all mixing with us lot, and they were bringing the reggae over from Jamaica. We didn't really clock like the Trinidadian stuff then, the calypso that was big in the 50s, 50s, but the reggae had really become a big thing because that was built on the ska scene. Certainly. That was part of the mod scene.
Right.
So I was kind of just connected and raised up in two camps at the same time. Originally the mod camp, if you like, and then one foot in the rock world and big festivals and stuff, and then the other foot in the kind of the reggae world.
Yeah. You frequently mention the mod scene. What has become of the mod scene?
Well, it kind of had a revival the same time as the two-tone ska reggae revival. So in the late 70s, when I had my little shop, I'd been in Wales for a little while doing antiques and kind of dropped out. And then I moved back to London when I was 20 and opened up a shop in Kensington Market, which is like an indoor street market on 3 floors. It doesn't exist anymore, but all the kids from all over London used to kind of hang out there all week long, play truant from school. And we had our own non-stop hype for about a year and a half, 2 years. And during that time, the punk scene that kind of came and went almost in a flash. So you had the tail end of the punk scene hanging out down there, and then you had a lot of the mod scene where the particularly kind of exploded with that film Quadrophenia.
Yes, indeed.
And then the reggae thing reignited and ska scene reignited with the advent of two-tone in May 79. That's when it really kicked in and hit when Gangsters Al Capone went straight to the top of the charts. And then it was like that dance craze. And like in my little shop, I've got like mods, rockabillys, teddy boys, skinheads, rude boys, all of us lot. We consider ourselves rude boys. Now you use the word rude boy, and you know that might be interpreted by the kids of today in London as being kind of like they're like kind of gangster style thing, probably more related to sort of hip hop and that kind of world now. There's rude boy.
Okay.
Now the rude boys is not a fashion that we call like that 60s style rude boy thing,
Right.
but now it might kind of have connotations of aggression and kind of, you know, kind of like bit fly and kind of like
Okay.
carrying it toward
Yeah.
up and the rest of it. But you know, in a way that's what the rude boy had elements of that in the 60s, you know, the rebels
Indeed.
of the day.
Right.
You know, wearing all the continental fashion. Now they're wearing American hip hop fashion.
Right. Right. So Gaz, at what point did you realize that the UK was home to a plethora of Jamaican expats, you know, who are around, you know, since the birth of ska, because a number of them were living right in the UK.
Yeah, well, in my primary school days, Southeast London, by the time I sort of hit about 10 and 11, I was really heavily into football and then looking for the nearest football grounds to go there. And by that time, you know, all those chart-topping Trojan hits were at every football ground, blaring really loudly, and that was the scene. And there was a lot of the skinhead scene. We were going to all the football matches, particularly. Well, my team was always Man United, so when they played in London, I'd go to see them whatever place they were. Chelsea was probably like the heart and soul of the birth of like the whole skinhead scene, and I never seen so many skinheads in all my born days as Chelsea in '69. You know, it was almost like 3/4 of the 50,000 crowd going to watch the football with skinheads. You know,
Wow.
Wow.
and they had something. A lot of them were slick. So in 1970, when I moved to Holland Park School and to Notting Hill, where Notting Hill and Brixton were the two areas where most of the Jamaicans gravitated to in the 40s and 50s and 60s. And there's a lot of people there. So Southeast London, there weren't so many. So my primary school, there was probably only a couple of black kids there. And my brother, I've got one adopted brother, Ben, who in 1965 he was born, and my mother was kind of like two minds about having another kid, and my dad really wanted more another kid, and so somebody said to her, well, you know, black kids are the only people who are not getting adopted because the black parents families are having enough already. They can't feed an extra mouth, so they're not taking extra in. And so particularly black males are just going through foster homes, and if they come up for adoption, no one wants them.
Wow.
So they my mum's friend, who was a nurse at the time, said, oh, look, there's this kid here, it'd be such a shame, you know, he's such a sweet, he's just been born, he's like a few days old, and he's got no chance, and you want a kid, why don't you just come down and have a look at him down in the hospital? And she went round, they said the mother was out of wedlock, she was like really dark Indian, her dad was African, he was at law or something, her family wouldn't allow the baby to take it on in the family. It was different days in the 1960s, 65. Sure. And also the civil rights movement was massive at that time and really carrying weights in the UK, particularly in the bigger urban centres like the capital, London. So and my father obviously playing, you know, based his whole music on black sort of roots music, and thought, well, you know, well, maybe we should do our bit for the world and go and have a look at this baby and weigh it up. And the second my mum saw him and he smiled and sat on her lap, she's like, all right, okay, well, I don't want to go through like, you know, any more miscarriages or kind of like she had one, she was going to have twins at one point, and one died in childbirth, and so she was really put off. So she'd been like, you know, 3 years without having a kid. And we had 3 at the time: me, my brother Jason, and my sister. And then, so in 1965, all of a sudden, 10 days old, sitting on my lap at home, meet your new brother. So I've grown up with like a jet black brother all my life, and you know, I don't say, oh, and when my mother remarried later and she had 2 more kids, I don't say, oh, he's half a brother, or he's a bit of a brother, or you're either my family, you carry my surname, grown up with you since birth, helped change the nappies and clean up the toys at the end of the day and everything, and you know, so like family is family. So I've grown up sort of feeling sort of like that I can't see the difference between black and white. It's like people is people. But in the early 60s, Southeast London, where we were living then, there's very few black people that I really noticed. You know, the majority was white. And when we moved to Notting Hill, I was blown away. I went to the first day at Holland Park School, and it was like I was a big fish in a little pond back in Southeast London. Moved to Notting Hill, to a school of 2,000 kids, a comprehensive school, and yeah, every color and background and type of people, rich, poor, black, white, and everything in between. And they just abolished the school uniform at the time. So all the kids were all dressed up in their most outrageous fineries or whatever. So you had every type, you know, 1970, you got the skinheads, you got the hippies, you got every kind of strata of society. You know, there's posh kids mixing with Barrow Boys kids, and it was a really interesting time. But I'd say there was a massive amount of black kids there, and they were all like into the music, and we had sound systems set up in our playground sometimes.
Oh my goodness!
Non-stop reggae. Non-stop reggae.
That's amazing. Wow.
So it really struck home, and then that is the area where our carnival started as well. And it already had made inroads there, and you had lots of clubs in the area. All the shebeens were in Notting Hill. So I've landed now right bang smack in the middle of kind of carnival country.
Indeed, and we're gonna talk about the carnival in a few minutes. But first, talk about the exposure and impact that two-tone music and those bands had on your life.
Well, it was funny because the first time there were one of the newspapers that kids used to read. Now everything's online, but information we used to get from 2 music papers that have been popular since like the 40s and 50s.
Okay.
Now they were dealing with kind of in the 60s. There was 2 big ones, the Melody Maker and New Musical Express, which later became known as the
NW, right?
NME.
Yeah, there you go.
Those 2 papers. So when Gangsters by the Specials came out, Special AKA, on two-tone, all of a sudden you got a big article, front page articles in both the 2 main papers, with something that stood out that nobody was looking like that at all. Everyone's like, I got longish hair. The black kids they remember the Jerry curls and stuff, and it was all looking like a kind of the soul scene had gone one direction and kind of got the whole world seemed to have got hippified and gone casual. And all of a sudden, all these kids on the front page of the music papers, slick as hell, wearing suits and looking just like young and slick and looking fantastic. And then you see them listen to music and say, that's the music that we're playing down. I had a little Dunset record player in my shop in Cam Market in 78, 79. And we were playing all that music. So old records, I took them all from my house, and my bluebeat, ska and reggae collection and soul. And all the kids who were playing truant all day long, they could hang out in the shop all day long, trying on clothes and work on records. And when that came out, we were all dressed like that. We're dressing like that, and a mate of mine was a hairdresser, and he'd open up a salon downstairs, and we're all getting our hair cut for nothing and styled in different ways and things. But when the Specials hit the scene, we're like, hang on,
Right?
They're like us. They're playing out the music that we're into. They're dressing like what we look
Yeah.
like. So that's wonderful, and it really stood out. Up until then, we felt like we were just a little kind of clique on our own, you know. And then it suddenly just smashed the whole country wide open, and the whole world sort of took note and got into that. And within a year, I've opened my club and not doing a shop anymore because I couldn't source any of the secondhand vintage clothes that I was selling in the shop to all these kids. All the musicians, those bands used to come to Ken Market, buying clothes off me. The kids were buying the clothes off me. And then I just couldn't get enough clothes. So I didn't want to manufacture them and start getting into that. And then I just took the party from Ken Market and just moved to West End and started running my nights.
Wow. So I want to step back for a minute. When did you start collecting records? At one point you said, I'm going to become a collector. There's a need and a necessity to own these precious vinyl.
Yeah, I think it was just basically a voyage of discovery, and it took many, many years before I even recognized it as looking like a collection or becoming a collection or regarding myself in any way as a collector of anything. But I definitely did become a collector at one point. But I think I first started getting records from moving from Southeast London to Notting Hill because we got the famous Portobello street market. It's like a flea market.
Okay.
Like what you call a swap meet. It's very similar to that. Loads of stalls, but lining down a long road, and people selling bric-a-brac and all kinds of stuff. And you got to think like in 1971, 72, 73, when secondhand stuff is coming out, people having to clear out, they don't want their old records, the music has changed or someone's died, and they're just like, all right, don't want that anymore, and they throw out their old clothes, their old records. You buy a whole box of records like so,
right,
for £1 or something, you know, a couple of dollars, and you get home and it's like, oh, what's this? Oh, Prince Buster on a label called Blue Beat, and like, hang on, he's the famous Prince Buster that we're all that was X-rated from that song Big Five we all knew from like Skinhead days.
right.
And what's this one? Blue Beat? Well, let's hang on. My dad's into blues. What do you mean Blue Beat? And so I put them on a deck, and then I discovered ska and Blue Beat and ska, and realized that all of these massive reggae legends that were like chart toppers started with ska. So then I'm like, what is ska? So this is probably, you know, I'm like 12, 13 years old then. And just buying as many as I could to find out more and more of these. I really got hooked on the sound. And as the kids were getting, the richer kids were more getting into like the more and more rock, and just at the dawn or the birth of heavy rock turning to metal and that. So Black Sabbath just coming on the scene, Deep Purple and things like that. Jimi Hendrix had just died. And for me, the whole that world was just falling apart and gone too far in the direction that I was totally no longer interested in. And so now the pop of this time and Gary Glitter, David Bowie didn't appeal to me. I just wasn't interested in anything that seemed to be current at the time. And now I've gone down the market, and I'm on a voyage of discovery to find out more and more about Jamaican music, and got more and more into rock and roll, and find out it's coming from rhythm and blues. And my dad brought me up playing all the slow stuff. So if you buy these old R&B records, my dad was playing like the ballad, but on the other side, that's the stuff that I was really interested in. Muddy Waters once said wrote a song before he died called The Blues Had a Baby, and the name of the baby Rock and Roll.
Yes.
Now, I fell in love with rock and roll and rhythm and blues, the jumps, the stuff you can dance to, because I was a dancer. My dad never danced, but I really loved dancing. And, you know, we all were dancing to reggae, and then the rhythm and blues. When I found out that the reggae came out of ska and ska came out of rhythm and blues, I was like, oh, bingo. It all makes sense. It's one big happy family tree.
Absolutely.
So essentially you started collecting everything with focus on ska.
Yeah, but you know, R&B too, you know, a big collection of blues and rhythm and blues and things. But then,
you had relatively deep pocket.
Be
collecting everything.
That's a good question, because I was just coming up to that. See, the problem was even though I love soul music and everything too, and a lot of stuff that the mods were into, a lot of those records were worth a lot more money, and they were already going for big bucks. And it was very hard. I thought, well, if I've got £10 on me, what am I going to invest in? When I go to a record shop looking for things and going through everything, oh, can you play this, please? Can you play that? How much is that? Oh, that's £30. Oh, well, I'll come back for that another time. They weren't doing many reissues in those days either. So, you know, I thought, well, I love that, but I'll have to wait. Well, what can I get for my money? And at the time, no one seemed to be interested in Jamaican music. So I was getting that dirt cheap. I was traveling for it as well. If I caught wind and heard that there was a shop with like old stock from 10 years ago, like, you know, it's 1973 and you're buying something that's 10 years old, you're buying something from 1960,
Of course.
you know, and stuff like was 5 years old to 6 years. They couldn't sell it anymore. No one was interested, but I was. So I was buying tons of it.
So you had that vision even at that early age.
Yeah, I just truly believe that one day all that music was just as worthy and will be just as valuable as the soul stuff. Indeed. Or whatever else was going for the big money then. Right. I thought one day, so I just like, what can I afford? What can I get the most of? And I'd say maybe buy a kind of like an album with R&B stuff on it, an album with soul stuff on it. But I go out and buy single after single after single of all the Jamaican gear. So I built up a really big ska collection. And then there was stuff I'd go out there and I'd end up getting home and think, oh, I've already got a copy of that. I've got a copy of that. So then I met an old guy who was a real collector, and he managed to get the proper collector of the Jamaican music, and he started publishing these books, hand printed. He'd got hold of all the catalogs of all the major independent labels, all the most important independent labels,
Studio One,
Ireland, Blue, Studio One, all of the Jamaican labels that were issued in the UK in the 60s and early 70s. And so I've got that, and I think, oh my God, I've just hit the tip of the iceberg. And I thought, just now, well, if I've heard this and this bit is that good, there's this whole area that I've got to get. So then I just went in earnest and looking to try and find every single record that ever came out of Jamaica in the 60s. And I got close to it.
Exceptionally deep.
Yeah, I got close to getting them all at one point. And then you still, the odd one would surface that didn't get released or something. Sure. I even had a lot of unreleased stuff, because then I was getting involved in like clubs and things, and made friends with Prince Buster and Duke V and various other like DJs and artists, and they were like saddling me up with music and pointing me in the right direction and filling in some gaps. And it got to the point, the voyage of discovery got to the point where I've heard nearly all or enough of it to basically, I've got the main bulk of it now in my mind, and there's only so much room it can have. And then they started reissuing them as it gets more and more popular. And then when I hit a bad run, I've got no money, and you know, still got to pay my bills, I let a few things go and don't mind playing the reissue of it and stuff. Yeah. But by and large, I've still got a fantastic collection.
I bet.
So let's talk about the launch of your Rockin' Blues Club. How did that come about, and what year?
1980 was the year I started it, in July. I had my shop going, as I mentioned, sometime then, year and a half, nearly 2 years. And I was down the West End, and I popped into a club. Some friends were doing a night at Gossip's, where I ended up doing my night for 14 years in that venue. I'd gone down there because the DJ, this gay guy, was into rocksteady and early reggae and a bit of ska, but particularly more into like soul and that. And Alex, I can't remember his surname, but he used to come down my shop, and he'd been to a night that I'd done in Oxford Street called the Two Tone Nights, with a promoter who used to put on punk things, Alex Chawoski. He had the Vortex and Major he was a major part of the punk scene, putting on all the early punk bands a few years before. So anyway, a couple of years before. Now he realised the big thing was two-tone, so he opened a club in Oxford Street doing that. And it only lasted about 3 weeks, but all of us kids from Ken Market went down there, and I was DJing there the first 3 nights until there was a massive fight erupted and the place got closed down.
Wow.
And so that was that was in 1979, September 79. So a few months later, when this gay friend of mine was doing this night, there was virtually no one in the building. I came there to give him some support, went there with a couple of mates. I was looking around, I liked the music. There was hardly anyone there, and no one on the dance floor except for 2 singly unattractive fat birds, if I'm allowed to call them that. And it was like, oh, Alex, man, you got this great club. Shame there's no people anyway. So
what kind of music was being played?
I was playing rocksteady and ska and all the stuff I'd been playing at the two-tone club.
Okay.
But he just didn't have access to any people. He just didn't have a following. He didn't have any ground base of who to bring there. And because he was gay, probably most of his contemporaries and most of the gay scene, they were all into a completely different, like bang sort of like house type music, a completely different wavelength of musically. And so he couldn't get any people there. He loved the music, he was a fan, but he was just on his own with like 2 or 3 people there, and he just couldn't get the word out. And so it lasted that one night, and I just happened to be there. As I'm leaving, the manager said, "Oh, suppose you could do any better." I said, well, anyone could.
You were up for the challenge.
They said, here's my phone numbers. Call me, and you can do every Thursday night, because this he's gone. And we've got the Thursday night open, and if you want to do it, 60-40. We take 60%, and you take 40 of the door, and then we take the bar. Anyway, so I called him back 2 weeks later after I'd been putting the word out saying, what do you think? What do you think? What do you think? And everyone said, do it.
That's right.
So I called him back and I said, 50-50 and you're on. So we opened on the 2nd of July, 2nd or 3rd of July, 1980.
Wow.
And I've got a friend in Portobello who ran a badge business. He printed on like a piece of paper, and then he stamped the badges into that. So the sheets of paper he did like in tricolor, a bit like the Blues Brothers colors. Blue. My color scheme was like, rather than red, gold, and green, it ended up being red, yellow, and blue. The primary colors that all other colors come from. But in this instance, he did this kind of green fading into yellow, fading into red as a background, and we printed all the badges on that. But
and also, this is like what's right behind you, right?
That's the logo. No, if I'll run and get you the poster. Can you wait 1 second?
Sure.
Yes.
It's hanging on the wall right here.
Yes.
There you go.
Real time. We're gonna do a little show and tell talking to Gaz Mayall. The incomparable.
Right. This is the original.
Oh, all right. Wow.
Okay. The green run into the yellow into the red.
Very cool.
So we printed. I just scribbled on it, and he copied a load of those. And the background, we stamped all the badges, Gaz's Rocky Blues badges, and just gave them away free at the door on the opening night. And hundreds of people turned up on the opening night. We put these flyers up all around Notting Hill, Camden, Kings Road. And that was it. The place was packed, and the owner, it was the only black-owned club in the whole of central London at the time. And Vince Howard, who looked like a cross between Muhammad Ali and James Brown, said to me at the end of the night, he said, he was Jamaican. He said, Gary, that's what he called me, Gary, just believe me, this night will last 3 years. I'm like, I was 22. I was like, couldn't imagine what 3 years looked like. I can't picture that, but at least I know that I'm clear on the first 3 weeks are going to be all right. But
and it's still you kept it going for over 4 decades.
Yeah, well, the second week is usually, because anyone can have a big party on the first night,
Sure.
But
Okay.
the second week is how you know if it's going to work or
Interesting.
not, because everyone made it on the first night,
Right.
and the second week, then I was surprised. It was really busy. It wasn't quite as busy as the first night, but it was packed still. And then the third week, it was busy as the first night,
Yeah.
and then it just continued straight the way through.
Persevere.
And I'm doing it 43 years later.
43 years.
Incredible.
Yeah, be 44 this summer.
Mhm. And how is it now? How is business now?
Packed, absolutely rammed. And what's lovely
So
about
what do you
it
have?
is
Turntable, a live band, or what? Or both?
I always put a live band on every Thursday, feature a live band, and we have a regular DJs, and the DJs, the band plays at the same level sound wise as the DJs, the records. And for the last 28 years or however long it's been since I left Gossips when that was closing, and I moved to the new venue, which is just as old as Gossips was. It's another basement dive just around the same area, one street away. And that's been going from 1960. Still got the same owner. He's 87 now, Sweetie of San Moritz.
Wow.
And he's still there
Has
every
any
Thursday.
other Southern California bands passed through your club?
Yeah, we've got a few. We've had bands from all over the world, Japan, America.
But I meant the local bands here.
Yeah, we've got loads of bands in the UK. Every week I have a different band. Feature one band every week. Rarely have two. Sometimes it's a double bill, but usually just one band is plenty, because it's all about like coming down to dance, and the stage is small, so you can't have tons of gear knocking around. There's no dressing room. People changing the cloakroom. Everyone's mingling with everyone else, and so it's been a huge success, but unexpectedly, and it's still going strong to this day. What I was going to say, what's really lovely about it is that generations of youth have been coming there, because unlike the States where you've got to be 21 to go into a bar or to a club, here it's 18.
Oh, okay, right. So
And when I first, so now I'd say that at least 50% of the people who come through the door on any given Thursday night are under 25, and that's and usually probably the majority will be closer to 18 than 25.
Right.
And then the other 50% age from 25 to my age. I'm 66 now.
So for bands from California who are coming through, if they want to work the club, they have to contact me or you.
Either.
Just
we've got one coming up soon. Stop the Presses.
Oh yeah,
have you heard of
yes, from the East Coast somewhere. Yeah.
Right. Well, they're coming over soon, and they've booked a date with me for sometime in April. I think they're doing a show in April.
Nice. Yeah.
They're doing, I think, their first European tour, so they wanted to play down the block.
But,
you know, Fishbone did their one of their first shows in London at my place. They did their first ever show at a place called Dingwalls in Camden.
Okay.
And on that same night, because my brother Jason lived in LA for about 7 years.
Yeah.
And he was friends with them when they were all just coming out of school, and saw their first gigs and stuff when they were still like a kids band. And so when they were coming to London, he called they called him, and so he went to Dingwalls to see them, and it was a Thursday night, and they came down to my club that same night afterwards, and I had an all-girl ska band called the Deltones playing then.
Oh yes.
And they borrowed the Deltones instruments and did a whole set for us on the stage.
But rest assured, you're gonna get a lot of calls from bands from Los Angeles coming through.
Excellent. Look forward to it. Bring it on.
Yeah.
More than welcome.
Bring it on.
So Gaz, speaking of groups, let's talk about the formation of your group circa '86 with the Trojans. Let's talk about how that came about, and why you honed in on a style that's often called like Gaelic ska, right?
Okay, yeah, or Celtic ska. Okay, so in the early 80s, I met a guy called Big J Munkady, who was busking in Portobello Road. Would have been like 1981, 82. And he was a big guy with gold teeth from New Orleans, who talked very, very loudly and seemed to repeat everything he said.
Okay.
And it was only when I went to New Orleans and got on one of the horse and buggies and realized, because by day he was taking people around on the horse and buggy rides around New Orleans, the tourists and that, and by night he was singing blues in the bars. He was a harmonica and player and singer, and really, really good in like that real Chicago style. Anyway, so he'd be talking, and when I realized why he repeated himself and talked so loud is because on the horse and buggies, every time a car goes by, the guy who's leaning around and telling you, oh, this place over there and that place over here, and this is where such and such happened, and you can't hear what? So you'd have to repeat everything twice and talk really loudly over the noise of the traffic. So that was Big J. But anyway, he was wonderful, and we were jamming. And someone said, "Oh, you've got to go down to that club." So he came down to my club, and then we met him in the market when he was busking afterwards, and a couple of days later, and we all hung out. We came around to a friend's house by the Bella, and we were just jamming. I was playing piano. He said, "Yes." And he looked at everyone in the room and said, "That's the man I want to play piano, my band in England." So next thing you know, we formed a band with just all our mates.
Right.
And we did some shows, backing him mainly, but then I was also using it as a vehicle to exercise my songs, because I was writing a lot of songs. I'd started writing poetry when I was living in the mountains in Wales in my greenhouse period before I come back to London.
Okay.
And my dropout time, antique dealing that. But I taught myself to play piano there, and with all these antique pianos and harmoniums, and then was writing a lot of poetry and writing a lot of songs. But I never really pictured I'd ever get in a band. It was more like kind of a little sideline hobby that all the kids were playing one instrument or another. We were always jamming. And next thing you know, I'm in a band, and then he went off on his route, Big J, and then I ended up with the band and called them Gaz's Rebel Blues Rockers, with a nod to the club. We did quite a lot of shows, and I kind of honed my craft with that band, and we split up just on the eve of our very first single ever coming out.
Oh, wow.
It was Trigger Happy, a ska side on one side, and a blues, like a Hoochie Coochie Man style thing called Aggravation Station, about stop and search and police sort of aggression and stuff. So that was like my cutting the cloth of my trade as the musician I became later, and that kind of crashed and burned and took a nosedive. And in that period, the next 3 years until the Trojans started, I was concentrating on the club, promoting other bands, and starting my record label, and managing Potato Five, and getting Laurel Aitken out of the woodwork and getting him on the stage, and bands like the Pioneers that people hadn't heard of for like 10 years, and getting them back on the scene. Delroy Wilson, Alton Ellis,
Oh my goodness.
Prince Buster. And then through that time, I was still jamming a lot, but I thought I won't start my new band until I get the right people. And then things all kind of configured. And in the tail end of 1986, we started rehearsing and came up with a sound. But I was also always a big fan of Irish music, Scots and Irish music, Gaelic music, Celtic music. And having lived in Wales, which is part of the Celtic fringe, and having lots of time to really absorb that kind of ancient sort of country, our sort of British country heritage, which isn't like the country in Western in the States. It's like real kind of Cayley music and the sound of old time Ireland. And so I grew up with that, and bands like the Dubliners were really big in the mid-60s with us, and we had an Irish lodger, and he really turned me on to all that music and used to take me to see the Dubliners. And I became a big fan of like traditional Irish music. And my best friend down the road, Paul Crowley, took me to Ireland in 1966 with his family. We stayed on a farm where there was no bathroom, and the bath only came out once every 2 weeks, and everyone had to take turns in the kitchen in the tub with topping it up with hot water. And it was like I really got into that Irish thing. So by the time the Trojans were forming, I was just wondering if there's a way I could fuse the two together, ska and reggae, with that, and realize that through studying the history of Jamaica and that, a lot of their music was the same chord changes and the same kind of framework and tempos as Irish music, and it was just like a not only a clear, easy marriage and connect, but a lot of Jamaican history came out of Irish and Scots music anyway, because at the time when slavery was abolished by the British, that was like 1824, way before the United States. And so we had all the plantation in the colonies, like Jamaica was a British colony at the time. And people who'd be working in that slave labor in the plantations, the sugar plantations, didn't want to work in that anymore. I mean, some did, but now we had to start paying people. And you still had the sugar orders to meet, because sugar was massive in the UK in the 19th century. And it was very popular. And so they advertised for people to go from the UK, and they said to the Scots and Irish, you will have a whole plot of land for life, a house and land. If you work in a plantation, you can grow your own food there and have a house and a job for life, and land for life and a house for life. So they reckon about 200,000, mainly Irish, because the Scots ended up going up to Canada, and the Irish, if the ones that didn't go to Ellis Island, New York, they went down to Jamaica and took up their posts there. And so you had so much of that culture already embedded in the roots of that. And there was the British enslaved the English enslaved Irish people. There was white slaves from Ireland in the 1700s.
Wow, right.
And so they had a common heritage, and they were being evicted from their lands either from plague or pestilence, and particularly starvation, which was kind of forced on them because all the crops in Ireland, they were sending, when there was a drought and a blight on the potatoes and things, they were sending all the food that they were growing there to England and to sell abroad for money, and letting the people starve there. So they were leaving, and then the land in Scotland, they were carving up the land and putting sheep on it and getting rid of all the people, evicting them for the land. So you had like a huge amount of the Celtic fringe, as we call it, the far west and the far north of the British Isles and Ireland, were starving, and they all fled to the States and to the Caribbean. And so that's why you got that part of the story. So just came straight out of that, really.
Yes, sir. Interestingly enough.
Wow.
So I want to take you back to the Trojans, right?
Yeah.
You recorded with some of the biggest names in the early Ska and Ska Rocksteady fraternity, Prince Buster, Rico, and if I'm not mistaken, some other ones. But bring us up. What was it like working with those icons, those legends, those artists?
Beautiful, absolutely beautiful. It wasn't just with the band working with them. It was like with the sound system and me touring. Particularly, there was particularly doing things like in Japan, when they started to really get off in that music and put on some big shows and take over acts. And so I'm mainly talking like the Scatterlights, when they reformed and started to come to Japan, and Prince Buster was playing with them over there. They got him doubled up with them. This is like the early 90s, but I'd already been like promoting loads of the Jamaican artists I mentioned earlier, and working with them and having them play down my club. And it's hard to find somebody that wasn't playing there. I mean, look on the wall here. This was a great night. Desmond Dekker.
Oh my goodness.
1984.
December.
At my club.
Wow.
It's a shame about the glass there. You can't,
we can see. Yeah, that's a wonderful Desmond Dekker. Wow.
Yeah. So Laurel Aitken, I had him playing with the Potato Five.
Right.
Woodwork. He was spending his last £2 trying to make a soul record in Brixton when I was introduced to him, and I said, well, why don't you take up Ska again? I'm managing a band and recording these tunes with them, and they're fantastic. It'd be perfect. What? No one can play ska like the old days. And I said, come and have a look. And he was like, whoa. And so I said, all right. So I got them in the studio and recorded with him. He gave me a load of cassette tapes with things to listen to, and that was wonderful. But I just love the attitude. And then I'd take him over to Japan, touring to DJ, and he'd be singing with other bands over there. Took Potato Five there one time with him, and we just never stopped laughing the whole time. 1984, when Desmond first started playing down the club, I've become good friends with Prince Buster, who was over for the first time since 1967 to do this reggae sunsplash thing, where he come with the Scatterlights to do just 3 numbers. The Scatterlights played three numbers with him, and I think it was rained off. Not many people turned up. It was far away. Crystal Palace, so far away to put the event in a football stadium. I think they expected a lot of people, and it just didn't happen. But just before the show, a music magazine called Black Music International didn't have anyone to interview the Scatterlights and Prince Buster, and it turned out they were put up in a hotel, literally 2 streets away from my house. And a friend of mine who was working with a magazine says, look, you know enough about this music. I know you're not a journalist or anything, but can you go and interview them and just write a piece for the forthcoming show? So I went round there, knocked on the door opened. It was very dark in there. It was just a cloud of smoke, marijuana smoke.
No, in some tailpipe.
Yeah. And it was like all the original Scatterlights in there. Jar Jerry, they were all still alive, and they were all there. And bar Don Drummond, of course. And Prince Buster was supposed to be there for the interview, but he'd gone out shopping. So I had to come back later when he was there. And then I got back there later when he was there. And we just connected. He came in there, we cooked some food. He introduced me to everybody personally. And then he came around my house, which was 2 streets up the road there, saw the records, was playing the tunes, and met my family and was hanging out. And anyway, when the Scatterlights and everyone went back after the show a week later, he changed his ticket and ended up staying another 3 months. And he got me as his sidekick to go around looking to round up all of what happened to all the Blue Beat label, because his mentor, Emile Chalet, who started Blue Beat label from Melodist, which originally started in the 40s, the label, an old Jewish entrepreneur who was like a war hero and stuff, and really interesting character. And Prince Buster loved him, but Emile Chalet just passed away, so he was trying to get in touch with her daughter Beverly and find out, because Prince Buster was the major shareholder of the record label, so he wanted to find out where all the old stock was and how to revive the label and how to get it all go through his lawyer. So I helped to do that for the 3 months in 1984, and we just ended up becoming best friends. And he just, every time we come back, we're hanging out. And by the late 80s, we didn't really have any plans to record or play together, but we were just jamming Stagger Lee one day on the piano, a couple of friends, and he said, "Oh, I know all the words to that." So he started singing it, and we put a little bounce in it, and we just said, "Well, why don't we just record it?" So we called up my friend, my engineer, Damien. He booked a studio for the following day. We got on the phone. He called. I got some of the Potato Five horn section. I got all of my band, plus some extra horns from there. He got his friend Satchmo, young Satchmo, used to make records in the early 60s on the Carnival label, and he's who's a trumpet player, but he's also a good percussionist, and he could sing like Louis Armstrong, which is where he got his nickname from, stage name. So he came on and trumpet, and we just recorded that night. And the day after that, we were doing a ska fest, a big Christmas ska festival show, and we turned up there, and we decided he decided, yeah, I'll come with you. Let's do that song on stage. So I said, okay. We played that song, and that was it. The rest of our set, we just had to throw it out the window and play that song 5 times in a row. No one
that was Stacker Lee. Is that
Stacker Lee? Yeah. and then I pressed it up a few weeks later. But that just smashed it, and it was like I've never been in such a situation where it was as if, you know, a sea of like 600 skinheads was just like almost like they were in ecstasy, not only dancing and going crazy, and almost bouncing and banging their heads on the ceiling, but they were almost kind of like bowing. I never heard such an audience reaction to anyone in all my born days. It was so exciting that night, very special. That was in 1989.
Infectious tune, and what an amazing experience having to work with so many of the legends and creators of the music that we all love.
So for my own edification, what became of those Prince Buster records? Who has them now? Who is in charge? Did you find them all? Were they registered, etc., etc.?
Well, his publishing company is Prince Buster Music BMI, and it's with his family, his wife Mola, and his sons. I know you've heard of a guy called Prince Buster Jr., but I think that's Prince Buster's son from a previous marriage, from when he was with Olive Blossom back in the 60s. And they don't seem to see eye to eye with the Muslim family that he grew up, that, you know, he was with Mola for a long time, and he got 3 like big sons, and he brought them up as Muslims. And I think his previous marriage wasn't, but they didn't connect with that the same way, as far as I know. Anyway, I went to his funeral in Jamaica, and it was clear that kind of like there was 2 factions there, you know, so I don't want to get involved in any family politics or anything like that, but I would presume that Prince Buster's estate is with his wife and that side of the family.
Right. So we must absolutely turn our attention to the incomparable 15-track release back in 1999 or 96, just before the
97. I know what you're going to say.
There we go.
Applicable Ska Island.
Yeah.
Right?
Oh, we love it so much.
Is that a play on words? But
yeah, well, it was Chris Blackwell. Yeah, nice. Yes. I originally wanted to have every single track put on it as a single, and I kind of sculpted it to make.
You mean so album and then release on 45?
They only made 2 45s, and they made the executive decision of which 4 tracks would be decided to be released on. But I was really pushing for that. That was their compromise, because I insisted to do at least 6 singles, to have nearly every track on. Originally they wanted only 12 tracks, and I had to fight to have the full 15, because I wanted 15, and I thought, you know, you've got space to do that.
So 15 on the CD, and then you said only 2 singles. Only 2 singles. This one, the Fishbone Toaster, right?
Yeah. All right. But those are 4 tracks that are on the 15-track CD. So they use that as a promotional tool, but they could have really put them all out. I think they would have been better off to put them all out.
Yeah, especially now, right? But let me rattle off for the benefit of our listening and viewing audience. Prince Buster and the Scatterlights, King of King.
Yeah.
Scatterlights, Magic Star, Doreen Schaefer and the Scatterlights, Can't You See? The Toaster, the Stage. That's my favorite, the Toaster.
That's a great one.
Man, you have to explain to me how that one came about. Fishbone. It's too many names to mention. Ernest Ranglin and Joey, yes.
Dan I jump with Joey.
Cat, one of the biggest band in Southern California at the moment. But
Ocean 11.
All right,
we got to continue. Rico and Freetown, Laurel Aitken and Freetown, Dr. Ringding and the Senior All-Stars, the Determinations, the Ska Flames, and your group, the Trojans. I mean, Gaz, when I had my radio show, I played this so much, and I know it's a favorite for juniors. So talk about how it came about.
Right. Well, Chris Blackwell was coming up to his 40th anniversary of his record label, Island Records, and he started in the late 50s, and the first single he ever put out was Laurel Aitken, "Boogie in My Bones," flipped
Yes.
with Little Sheila, which stayed in the charts for 11 weeks, and he managed to license it to a UK
Local
label.
chart,
Starlight.
Jamaica, not United Kingdom, right? Jamaican chart.
Yeah, so he came out in Jamaica, island in Jamaica. He released it with the same people who put out it's called R&B label, was one of the labels, I think it's to do with Federal and Whirl. There was a handful of labels around that time. Anyway, so he wanted to get into that business. So he put out the Laurel Aitken record to start his record label. And I asked him when I saw him, I showed him when I first met him, the Laurel Aitken single on Island Records, Boogie in My Bones. I said, why does it say WI002? Like it's the second release. What was the first one? He said, no, the first one was was a different label, wasn't him. And they made him write 002, but that is actually the first ever record that he ever produced and put out. So then he licensed it to Starlight, who were doing a kind of underground label in the UK for a rival of one of the many little rivals of Melodist, that eventually led to Bluebeat. Anyway, so put out that record over here, and it did well here as well. But that gave him ideas to keep doing it, and he wanted to really do something with this label. And then it wasn't long till he moved to UK, and he took the label here and established it here, and then started licensing records from back home in Jamaica. Instead of trying to produce them himself, he just licensed off Coxon, Duke Reed, and various people, and put out did his island label here. Now, when it was coming up to the 40th anniversary, he had a concept that he wanted to get all these pick somebody to produce for him, i.e. me, to produce an album of where I got to select all the bands and all the tracks, but he wanted all the tracks to be tracks that had already been released at some point or another on Island Records. So to take a new band or a new artist or an old, anyone of my choice, and select a track for whichever artist to play, as long as it had been.
That's amazing creative, great creative control there, Gaz.
So I got lucky, but because of my commitments, at 97, I was just being painted, but doing a portrait by Lucian Freud, a famous painter. And so I was in the middle of doing that. And then I had to program staging Glastonbury. My band was coming up on tour. I've got to do all the dates for the club, book bands for that, promote this, that, and the other. And I was like, whoa, I really want to do this project, but the only way I can make this happen is to do it the way that I'd actually like to have done it anyway, which is to bring it out like a newspaper, the way that they used to record in the 60s, which was to go into the studio with the band already rehearsed up, they know what they're going to do, go in there and do it in one take or two takes or three takes, the whole band at the same time, where they're feeding and vibing off each other. And so if there's a little bit of spillage over, there's not going to be any overdubs. We're doing this in one go. I've got a great engineer, so we get the separation you need, but at the same time, you're going to have people in the room, so you get a little bit of spillage into that, but that's how you get the warmth, extra warmth to the sound. You get that valve sound.
Yeah.
And then we pick the right microphones, the right studios. So with my engineer's help, Damien Corner, Alexis Corner's son, we traveled around the world. We went to LA, where we did Fishbone and Toasters.
Hepcat, Ocean 11.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you, Ocean 11. Can't forget them. And Hepcat were absolutely amazing. All the bands were fantastic. I would have done an album of each one of them if I had it possible. And then New York, and at first they were dubious about me getting some old guys in there. So I said, no, look, make the most of it. Scatterlights are on fire at the moment. Prince Buster's on fire. We get them and, take an old Scatterlights, Roland Alphonse. And I'm glad we did, because all those guys are dead now, every last one of them.
Yes.
And we had the most amazing time. And in the studio, New York, was fantastic doing those tracks there. And then we had I went to Germany to do Dr. Ringding, who's like my top favorite reggae guy from Germany. He's 1 in a million. When I first saw him, he was doing Shaman Family and Shaman Scandal in the Family, like in the mid-80s when I was touring with the Trojans there. And I thought he's great. And I kept up with it. He kept sending me his tunes, and he was really great. He did some amazing work with Derek Morgan, and he's still great.
Right.
And so I did him one track with him. Went to Japan, did 3 bands over there. Did Rico and Laurel Aitken with London-based bands over here. Ernest Ranglin was in Jamaica. We flew him over to LA for the project. And I turned around the whole thing from conception, from being asked to do it, to the thing being pressed, even me bringing artwork to him and everything. 3 months.
Wow.
Entire project.
So that must have been an astronomical cost. How was the sale?
To them, to Ireland. It was nothing to do with me, but guess what? It turned out to be not just their 40th anniversary, Chris's Ireland's 40th anniversary. It turned out to be the very last thing that Chris Blackwell ever did whilst he was the head honcho of Island Records. He sold it whilst I was making the album, recording it, and
I'm remembering. Yeah, I'm remembering that now. Yeah, wow.
He sold it, and then became like the chief executive. But it was the last thing to be released before that. Now, if we'd have done what they were trying to get me to do and take 6 months or longer over it, 6 months minimum, maybe a year over it, then what would have happened was that would have been compromised by the New York people, Universal Records, took it over, and it might never have even seen the light of day.
Yeah. So right.
It's like coffee. You water it down with milk, then you can recognize it.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah.
So, but were you happy with the response? I mean, I know so many.
Yeah,
people...
well, I pushed. I had to fight a little bit along the way, certain little steps along the way, but by and large, because I had Chris's wholehearted backing, it was only dealing with a couple of executives in between, and them having to put it through their board and all that to have their say. But they basically, I had carte blanche to do whatever I wanted, really. And I got it out the way I would have wanted it, so I'm very proud with it. It's one of my greatest achievements.
Well, we're gonna talk off the air. Junior and I have some ideas. We need to get it back. We need to get repressed and back in the circulation. So we have some ideas we're going to talk to you about, Gaz.
One last thing on that island thing. My only regrets with it was that they'd given me a camcorder. I mean, now you can just use your phone, right? Which would have been awesome. But in '97, they gave me a camcorder, and you couldn't film off your phone in those days. And they gave me a really expensive camcorder and a stack of little mini cassettes to put in there. And they asked me to film and record the whole thing from the inside, the whole project. And I gave them something like 20, 30 tapes at the end of the project. And I went to give them back the camcorder. They said, you can keep the camcorder, but we just want the tapes. And they were going to make a documentary about the recording of the whole project. And they are sitting somewhere in some office in New York. I don't know where, but one day, if they ever see the light of day, there's some incredible stuff.
Well, that's good to know. That's good to know.
Let's go looking for it.
Yes, yes, indeed. Wow.
Universal has it.
All right.
Yeah, so I'm wondering how the sale that album went, because really and truly has some of the top names in the fraternity.
Yeah, well, I hope it did well, but I was never privy to that.
Yeah.
All I know is that I got my copies, and I got a few that I could give to certain people.
It was released on CD, not album, right?
No.
I wanted them to put it on vinyl as well, but they refused to say. And at that time, CDs were all the sales. It was just before downloads. There was no downloading. It was all CDs had just taken over, and they didn't want to, as they call it, waste their money doing vinyl as well. Right. Yeah. Little did they know that if they'd have done it, that would still be selling today. More than the CDs.
Yeah.
Well, the timing is right.
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. Yes, yes, yes.
Well,
Yeah.
maybe somebody from Ireland or Universal is watching this podcast and
Here
this
we
And
go.
show.
chances are they will.
Yeah, yeah.
I think this project will make cash register ching ching ring. So I want to
Yeah.
shift focus and take you back to the Notting Hill Carnival. How long have you been involved with it?
Well, I went to the carnival the first time in 1976, and it had been going on for 3 years in its present states. 1973, a guy called Leslie Palmer, good friend of mine, he noticed that the carnival had been going for several years. It was a bit of steel pan, Russell Henderson playing the pan, and it was like mainly white people dressing in fancy dress and doing a little procession down Portobello Market Road, and it was just in a little mini park and stuff, and they spread out down Tavistock Road down by the flyover, but it was pretty small, and you get a few Jamaicans standing on the side, sort of looking at it, saying, it could be so much better, And Leslie's in 1973 he's from Trinidad, he invited 5 proper full-on big mass parade bands, full-on steel bands with floats and all the costumes. And he got 3 sound systems from Jamaica, local sound systems. He put a massive sound system in the street. And all of a sudden, tens of thousands of people turned up. The following year, 1974, it tripled, quadrupled. In 75, there was so many people there. There was like 500,000 people there, and they were so worried, the authorities said they knew 76 could be 1 million people there, which there were. And so they brought down like 20,000 police officers to line the streets and but in 76, those police were they were mainly from the country, from out of town, and most of them had never seen a black person and had never seen anyone kind of walking down the street smoking a spliff before. And they kind of taken the piss out of what people are wearing and stuff, and all the different styles, and kind of like there was every kind of people there, but you've never seen so many black people in all your life. And it was so sooner or later, because of the way the atmosphere between the general public, particularly the youth, and particularly the black youth, and the behavior of the police, and elements of corruption, but a huge amount of endemic racism within the force, and it had to kick off. And it started. I was at the junction by the flyover of Cambridge Gardens, Acklam Road and Portobello Road, and just where the flyover is. And I thought, what's all that commotion? And you saw like all the crowd coming towards us. So I ducked into the doorway. I was standing right next to Charles Shaka's sound system, and ducked in the doorway as a surge of people came there. So what's going on? And someone said, "Oh, the police are chasing everyone. There's like everyone being chased by the police." And the next thing you know, the wave went back out that way, and everyone's kind of running that way. And the people started chasing the police. So the police are having to like go into gardens and take dustbin lids to protect themselves, because everyone was just throwing bottles, and it was like a medieval war going on, like the Battle of Agincourt, where like you look in the sky and it's just like raining with missiles aiming towards the police. And anyway, that was the beginning of like the biggest riots the country had ever seen, and that riot kind of resurfaced again and again for a few more years, and you get very little trouble anymore. But in 1976, it really all kicked off and ignited a huge riot. And I was there then, and up until the riot, I thought it was the best party I'd ever been to in my entire life. And then with the excitement of all the riots and the looting and all the rest of it, and I was kind of stuck there. I had to go stay at friends and dangling out my legs out the window, watching as people are burning cars and everything. And I just thought, wow, this is incredible. And I never missed a carnival since. And then when my band was going early 82, I got a sound system going. I got my first band playing there. So from 1982, I've had a presence there with sound system and bands, and been doing that ever since.
How many people attend it nowadays?
You get a minimum of 1 million a day in a square mile or so, split square couple of miles, 2-3 miles.
I think LKJ, Linton Kwesi Johnson, that's when I discovered his poetry. He had a live album speaking about the Nothing Carnival. I've read about it extensively. As a matter of fact, I was over there the year of, but then actually discovered Linton on my own when I went to a record store and saw him. Is the album with him on a microphone.
Yeah. No, with Dread Beaten Blood is not a big one.
Right.
Yeah, he was very popular back in the day in the early 80s. He was really significant.
Yeah,
but a lot of people were inspired by that. That band, The Clash, you might have heard of them. Very top English rock band, The Clash. And they part at the beginning of punk and everything. They were inspired. They were all at the carnival there because they were all living around there too. So they got caught up in it as well. And that was a big influence on their band and their first records. So they made that was a big part of their forming and foundation. A lot of people were influenced by that, but I'm glad that the authorities didn't completely just say no to it. I think they needed it. They just needed to find a way to kind of make it safer, and because of what happened then, a lot was done to sort of break down the racialism within the like the police and stuff, and a lot of work's being done, and it's really changed a lot. I mean, I can imagine you have a much worse problem with racism in the States, I've noticed, than we do here now, because it's so well integrated here. But it's on a much smaller scale, this country, and it is so integrated, and there's still an element of endemic racism, but nothing like the extent that it was. I mean, by and large, you won't even notice it,
Yeah.
So it's very, very rare that you'll notice anything like that. I never see it in London.
Right. Gaz, we talked about this. Their name came up when we were talking about Ska Island album. Jump with Joey. We've known Joey for a long time. We as well as Willie, who we just interviewed on our drummer roll call panel. And during both interviews, both of Willie and Joey talk about you and your brother Jason. Talk about meeting Joey and Willie back in the day, and just maybe a highlight of Jump with Joey.
Yeah, well, I met them because they were good friends with Jason when he lived in LA for 7 years.
Right.
Around the same time. They're the same generation as Fishbone and that.
Yes.
And they were kind of young, good-looking guys on the scene doing something different. And Jason turned them on to, well, I think he helped turn them on to ska, but I mean, you need to ask Willie and Joey.
Willie actually said he did, yes.
We spoke to Willie recently.
Yeah, because when Jason come back to holidays and you see what we're doing in Ken Market and then the club and then the whole revival of two-tone and stuff like that. So I think he was there at that time in LA. So he was like, when they got their Jump with Joey band up and running and first came to the UK, of course, they're all staying locally and we're all hanging out, they're good friends, and we're playing around here, and I like their music and became good friends. They're still very close with Jason. Jason stays with Willie, and they always hang out. Yeah. And when I go to LA, I always make sure I see them.
Yeah. And speaking of which, you come out here to visit your father every once in a while, right?
Yeah. My dad emigrated there 68, 69, bought a house there in Laurel Canyon overlooking Hollywood.
Yeah.
And so when we were little, we used to go down there every year, stay there every year. Then I went less and less. But then these days I go more and more because he's really getting old now. He just turned 90 in November.
Thank goodness.
Wonderful. The whole family went over. I was the only one who didn't get over there. Sadly, that's another story. Finances wouldn't permit, but I'll get over there soon. We'll spread the load anyway and all hang out.
Yeah.
But yeah, he's living at home. He's finally retired a year and a half ago. So he had a very good,
You're not kidding.
very good
Yeah.
innings. As we say.
Right. So if we could shift focus for a bit, what other music producing would you like to touch on that you have not covered?
As we near the end of our conversation here, which could go on and on and on.
Oh well, we can continue it next time we come over to
Yes,
the
we
States.
love it.
Yeah,
Person.
over a cool beer at
you go.
one of your wonderful nights.
Yes.
Well, for the future, really, I'm more interested in just kind of ticking along, and I'm at that stage in my life where I really need to kind of archive everything, and then look at kind of what I haven't put out that I've already recorded, and go through the archives and just tidy everything up, because everything's all a bit of a kind of a mess of stuff in that corner over here, and everything's all mixed up. So I need to kind of compartmentalize everything and do that. And I think one thing I'm due to, the Trojans are overdue another record. We need to use a lot of the material that we haven't recorded yet. Oh, there's a cracker. Very proud of that one. We've got so many great musicians that have come through the ranks over the years. As the last album we did in the studio, Smash It, was we had Tan on trumpet. Now he's in his early 90s now, and he's now in a care home, so he's not able to perform anymore because he can't walk. Otherwise, he'd be still at home. But so he did his last 2 shows with us about a year or 2 ago, and then his family just says, "Look, please, he can't do it anymore," And
is there any relationship between the Trojans and the Trojan record label?
No, and I put out a couple of compilations with them for old ska music, for authentic 60s recordings. Right. I've worked with them before.
But there's no relationship. The label is independent.
The reason I called the band the Trojans was because there was no one doing that kind of music at the time. And I had my first band, the Rebel Blues Rockers, sounded like too much a nod towards kind of like, we did a kind of street kind of punky version of rock, R&B, rock and roll type thing. It was very raunchy with a bit of ska. But then when I start the Trojans, I want to go like 90% at least ska and related stuff. So I thought there was no one using a record label at the time. The record label had died a death years before. There was only a few old singles about.
That label has died multiple times. I was there 74, they died.
Yeah.
And Boot was #1 on the UK chart. Everything I Own. Trojan.
Yeah. That was pretty much their last hit. And then no one had heard of it.
And they resurfaced multiple times after, right?
Yeah. So at least 10 years or more had gone by. So a whole generation had never heard of Trojan. Yeah, and I had a pretty, fairly young band at the time, and we just want to hit the audience that was around then, the youth that were around then, and just give a nod to that. But one of the main reasons is that when I was at school, one of my first black mates there, a guy called Danai, went on to be quite a good singer and known singer in London at the time. In the late 70s, he had a hit with Island Records called Monkey Nut Chopped Banana. It's kind of soul record. He was into reggae and soul, but he ended up being more with soul. But anyway, Danai, when we were at school, he was a fan of Jimi Hendrix. Like I was dead keen on that too, and we had that in common, as well as reggae and everything. And he typical Jamaican, used to call somebody who he thought was like a right good fella, a right good chap, the adage, "You're a real Trojan, you're a true Trojan." And that came through the Jamaican expression to call someone like a jolly good fellow was a real Trojan, call him a Trojan, came back from the British public school days of the 19th century, the late 1800s. One thing that all the students had to learn was the earliest written book in Europe, Homer's epic stories of the fall of Troy and about the Trojans and the Iliad and so Achilles and all of that. So a nickname for people in Victorian England, if you were a jolly good fellow, they'd call you a right regular Trojan. And that pervaded and kind of came back through the colonies and came back to on to later. And a nickname for a good fellow was a Trojan. So
if I'm not mistaken, wasn't it that Duke Reed also named his label?
Yeah, see, Jamaica, all Jamaicans at that time would have known that if you're calling someone a good fellow or like a wise guy or real good chap, a good fellow would be another name for it would be a Trojan. But he had a Chevrolet truck. The model was a Trojan. And so when he started his sound system, when he left the police force and he won all that money on the sweepstake and built the biggest liquor store Jamaica had ever seen and started sound system and got involved in that, built a big sound system, he'd take his sound system on the back of his Chevrolet Trojan around the place, and he named his sound system Duke Reed the Trojan.
Mm-hmm.
And when his first record ever came out, Penny Real on 78 on the Calypso label, a Mentor record, Calypso Penny Real, it was on, he called the record label Trojan. I've got the original 78. Wow. And it's Trojan 001, and it came out in the mid-50s, and it's Penny Real.
From England to the colony, and from the colony Jamaica back to England.
Yeah, so Trojans, calling the band the Trojans means like we're calling ourselves the Goodfellas, or a nickname for that, you know, but also with a reference to the Jamaican birth of reggae and all of that and ska.
So I heard that Duke Reed's money came from his wife, Miss Reed. Now I have not read it anywhere, but no,
he won the sweepstake.
Oh,
but they reckon he Prince Buster reckoned that it was corruption. He reckoned that he cheated to win it, but you know, I mean, maybe he didn't. But he became a millionaire overnight and left the police force and built the biggest sound system that and the biggest liquor store.
Yeah,
started recording.
Wow. Man, I used to think that record store is that studio was heaven.
Yeah, well, it was a big thing in the history of Jamaica.
Really
I guess the liquor used to penetrate the floor.
Must have done. They say the guy never went anywhere without his gun.
Right.
He had a lot of bad man with him as well.
How about two guns?
Yeah, well,
Gaz, really, your wealth of knowledge and your contribution to the music, singer, musician, producer, label operator, DJ, promoter. I mean, that doesn't even describe everything, but
and he's only wearing one hat. Eh?
He's wearing one hat, and you wear the best hats. Let me tell you, and you wear it well.
I got this one from the other night. We did a Japanese theme night with some friends.
I mean, you're still shopping?
We're in a local pub, and I've got this bandana still on there.
Totally unique.
I love it.
It means we must win. This Japanese thing, we must win. The students were when they're taking their exams.
Nice.
I'm still a student.
Yes. So, any closing thoughts?
Well, I would like to say that being the great times I have in LA and seeing what a magnificent scene you have over there, and I wanted to go there for years. I would really love to come over when Eric Monty-Morris is playing there, because he's one of the only legends from that era.
You haven't seen him, right?
I've never seen him.
I'm gonna make an intelligent guess. You haven't seen him.
No, I haven't seen him.
All right, well, we're gonna make it happen.
Prince Buster always spoke so highly of him, and they were part of the original scene back in the day.
Right, he did give Prince Buster a couple of hits. Prince Buster's first recording when Derek Morgan took him with Duke Reed money. It's a long story.
I want to go to a cool bar with you guys, and
and I love it. And when I'm over in London this summer, I'm going to hit you up too, guys.
Of course, man. Well, you know, I'll get the red carpet brushed up, you know, shampoo washed and ready for you.
And mark my word, we're going to talk off the air about Ska Island. We do have some ideas. So
no kidding, you know, very serious ideas. It's going to benefit all of us.
Yes,
and the music fraternity,
indeed,
especially.
Indeed. And Gaz, thank you again, and give thanks to Ruby for helping with this as well.
I will do.
And thanks to everyone for your ongoing support. And please subscribe to this podcast series, and of course, our YouTube channel and follow us at History of LA Ska on Instagram and join our Facebook group.
And follow this gentleman at Junor Francis. And Gaz, you are also on social media,
Yes.
both as Gaz Mayall as well as the Trojans, right?
Mhm.
Yeah, the Trojans Band Official on Instagram, or Gaz's Rocky Blues Club, all one word. You know,
Anything else?
And Gaz Mayall, not Gaz Mayall 11. I got hacked and somebody's added 11 to it, so I don't use that at all. So it's just at Gaz Mayall or at the Trojans Band Official, which is relatively new, which I need to invest some time in. But Gaz Rockin Blues Club, you can really keep up to date with all of my activities.
I love
Right.
it.
And this series is produced by Rockery Radio at Rockery_radio. And one last question. Do you have any unreleased material?
Yeah, loads. That's why I'm going through all the archives at the moment, trying to kind of work out what I can do with what I've got.
We need to talk with vinyl selling the radios now. We really need to talk. I think you're sitting on a gold mine.
Yeah, and even just reissuing stuff is a good idea. You know?
That's exactly what I mean.
Right.
A gold mine.
Well, Gaz, again, much love and respect to you, Junor. Thank you as always.
Yes.
And we appreciate everyone's ongoing support, whether you watch us or listen to this series. Many thanks. And please get out and support live music. Until next time, we'll see you.
Peace.
Take care.
Thank you so much.
Absolutely. Take care.
See you later.